Good morning. My name is Susanne Prokscha. I use she, her pronouns, and I'll be your worship associate this morning. Today, we are honored to have as our guest worship lead J.D. Stillwater. J.D. is a science ambassador and author who writes and speaks about profound insights from natural reality, insights that drive paradigm shifts and cultural awakenings. This work springs from J.D.'s love of science and his gift for making difficult concepts graspable for non-scientists. J.D. is an officer of the Religious Naturalist Association, a global community of people who take nature to heart. He serves on the governing council of the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science, and he is a fellow of the Sinai and Synapsis. J.D. is married to Anne, who you'll be meeting later today, and has 2 grown children. We welcome J.D. to our pulpit.
It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here this morning. As we settle into our service, I invite you to consider a short poem by Adrienne Rich, titled Natural Resources. She writes, "My heart is moved by all that I cannot save. So much has been destroyed that I have to cast my lot with those who, age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world."
So the choir is about to sing a song. It's a song that we have done before, and it's a song that we like, and it's a song that requires some intense audience participation. So for this song, I just ask you to snap with me. And you're just going to keep this going until I turn around in about 4 minutes.
Lingers.
Susanne and I have 3 short readings for you this morning. And you don't often hear fire and brimstone in a UU church. But this first reading from Terence McKenna gets close. He writes, "We have to create culture. Don't watch TV. Don't read magazines. Don't even listen to NPR. That is all cultural diversion, and what is real is you and your friends and your associations, your highs, your orgasms, your hopes, your plans, your fears." And we're told, no, we're unimportant, we're peripheral. Get a degree, get a job, get a this, get a that. And then you're a player. You don't even want to play in that game. You want to reclaim your mind and get it out of the hands of the cultural engineers who want to turn you into a half-baked moron consuming all this trash that's being manufactured out of the bones of a dying world. Terence McKenna.
My reading is not quite so full of fire and brimstone, but it has an important message. Unfortunately, it's for the young children, the young people who many have left. But the first step, especially for young people with energy and drive and talent, but not money, the first step to controlling your world is to control your culture, to model and demonstrate the kind of world you demand to live in, to write the books, to make the music, shoot the films, and paint the art. And those are words by Chuck Palahniuk, who made them during a class at the Forum at Barnes & Noble University.
Our last one comes from Joe Bailey, who writes, "Life equates to being fairly simple at times, although we have the tendency and the unbelievable ability to complicate things. So I suggest we go to the basics. Do unto others as you would have others do unto your children. Yes, your children. Because they are the ones that will be left behind to live their lives in the world that we have created." Wow. This is not the slide we're supposed to be starting on. There we go. I'll give the tech folks a minute to get us. There we go. All right. I started working on this topic around Father's Day. So I was thinking about ancestors and descendants, grandparents and grandchildren. And at some point during the last few years, it seemed to Anne and me that grandchildren are probably not in our future. And for me, this brought some sadness. I'm not a pronatalist. Anne and I have been very careful never to pressure or even really to encourage our children to have kids of their own. It's just not our decision. And I want them to make it for themselves either way. But I see you grandparents out there. I know what I'll be missing. And I'm a little sad. I also know intellectually that what truly matters in this world is not my grandchildren anyway, but the grandchildren, some of whom were on the floor here a few minutes ago. Humanity's in a precarious place, a place where it's no longer even possible to protect my grandchildren unless we can repair the world for all the grandchildren. This is my mom with 2 of her great-grandchildren. Only one of them is a genetic descendant of hers. Can you tell which? No, you cannot. And if for even a fraction of a second you thought you could, well, think about that. Our brains have habits, and those habits come from somewhere. And that's what I'm getting at this morning. This is my mom's father, my grandfather. He was a good man and a product of his time. Grandpa believed deep in his bones that German people are the best. And he kept this detailed hierarchy of ethnicities and racial groups somewhere in his head. And I don't actually know how long his ancestors were on this continent, but I'm pretty sure they were mostly Germans. That's just part of my heritage, right? On the other side, my father's father was a genealogist, so we know that his ancestors were here a pretty long time. For example, I am directly related to the Admiral Dewey, who is known as the hero of Manila Bay for defeating the Spanish Armada during the Spanish-American War. And Grandpa was kind of unhappy when I changed my name when Ann and I got married. This is part of my heritage, too. My American heritage. Well, every summer on July 4th, most Americans celebrate the victory of plucky pioneer forefathers over the well-regimented armies of an oppressive monarch. Sound familiar? A victory which we celebrate by blowing stuff up, right? Well, I happen to really love fireworks. That's a different sermon. But I love them even knowing that they are a reenactment of exactly what's happening in Ukraine right now. Fireworks are a beautiful and an inspiring way that we glorify what is inherently evil. I can't reconcile these things. I just love fireworks. My American heritage. Well, in 2008, I took a test of implicit bias, and I discovered that in spite of all my enlightened efforts at treating people the same, my subconscious mind holds a stubborn bias against people of color. And ever since then, I've been looking more critically at my own heritage, especially its origins. Where did white culture come from? How did we get here? Well, after reading this book, I have an answer, or at least a strong clue. I think the origins of my American heritage are rooted in trauma. We know that families that have endured trauma are more prone to addiction, abuse, neglect, and other kinds of family dysfunctions. And such families often have an unspoken code that the 12-step group, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Other Dysfunctional Families, put into a nice sort of 4-line distillation. And that code says, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, and don't remember. Don't talk about the dysfunctions. Don't trust anyone because traumatized people are unpredictable and they can be kind of violent. Don't feel your feelings because they don't matter and you'll be punished if you express them. And don't remember anything that would undermine the happy family facade because everyone else in the family is just going to deny it anyway. You know, Disney got it right with their movie Encanto. This is a family rooted in trauma. We don't talk about Bruno, right? We work and we fight and we sulk, but we don't talk, trust, feel, or remember. Now, when nations are rooted in trauma, the same code applies. We get racial hierarchies. We get violence, and the threat of violence is the only imaginable means of achieving security. We get soul-crushing patriarchies and the kind of shallow nationalism that requires us to forget our own history. And this manifests as a social culture that idealizes individualism, selfishness, consumerism, neglect of community and the commons, and this really weird obsession with bootstraps. So what's this trauma I'm talking about? Just imagine what it was like to live in Europe during the Middle Ages. Brutal, ongoing oppression from people who looked just like you, with routine torture, wars, plagues, famines, cruel punishments that would be trauma-inducing for us to even imagine. Think about the toll the pandemic took on our mental health. Then multiply that by constant war, famine, torture, and make it last for 1,000 years. 50 generations. By the time the Renaissance came around, my ancestors were severely damaged, and they didn't even know it. They called it Western civilization. Did you know that until about 1800, a common form of summertime entertainment in Europe and its colonies was cat burnings? Entire villages would turn out. They would fill a sack with cats and then burn them alive over a bonfire for the sheer hilarity of it. If that's not mental illness, my ancestors were damaged, traumatized, mentally ill, and we've never addressed it. At this point, you may have seen or heard this word somewhere. And it might be related to how medieval trauma could still affect us today, especially me. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. Epigenetics is a relatively new, pioneering branch of molecular genetics. And it's only really been around since around the 1990s, so it's pretty recent. So in school, you probably learned about how our genes are encoded in DNA, and those gene blueprints determine all our physical features and some mental and emotional features too. But that's not the whole story. It turns out that our genes come with packaging, and for decades, we scientists thought that that packaging was inert, that it had no role in our development. But it turns out the packaging plays a fairly active role in regulating gene expression. Genes get turned on or off, or they're more or less active based on that packaging. And the packaging can be inherited. That's called epigenetic inheritance, because your genes, the DNA itself, is not changed, but its activity is changed in a way that can be passed on. So what does this have to do with trauma? Well, the seminal experiment on this was just done in 2013, not that long ago. The experimenters exposed mice to acetophenone, which is just a chemical that smells like cherry blossoms, just for a few seconds. And during those few seconds, they gave them a harmless but painful shock to their feet. And they did this 5 times. The next day, 5 more times. A whiff of cherry blossoms, shock to the feet. And then again on a 3rd day. That's it. Then they let the mice live out their lives, including mating and having babies. When the baby mice were grown, they exposed them to that same smell, and they immediately became anxious. Their heart rate and blood pressure rose, and their behavior looked like that of panic. A whole generation later, the grandchild mice reacted the same way to the smell of cherry blossoms. So they kind of scratched their heads and ran the experiment again, but this time they isolated the babies from the parents at birth. Same thing. They used in vitro fertilization and surrogate mothers. Same thing. And these were just harmless shocks over 3 days. And this result is so surprising, and potentially so relevant to who we are, that the field has exploded. So now there are hundreds of studies on epigenetically inherited effects of trauma. And it's not simple or clear-cut. There are lots of factors. Not all traumas and not all stimuli show up as dramatically as it did with the mice. But the concept has electrified the relevant sciences. And if it pans out, it suggests that some of our gut reactions, including ones we don't really like about ourselves, may have been programmed in us before we were even born. And the connection that Resmaa Menakem makes in his book is that our modern global culture, and specifically Euro-American culture, is rooted in the trauma of medieval Europe, no matter how it got passed down to us. And that trauma informed and shaped my Euro-American heritage. And it allowed my ancestors to brutalize and exploit indigenous people everywhere they went, initiating a self-repeating cycle of intergenerational trauma and dysfunction that obviously continues today. Trauma and dysfunction get transmitted directly through abuse and exploitation, but also culturally and probably epigenetically, at least to some extent. So it's deeply embedded in our bodies, our minds, our emotional responses, our language, and our religious traditions. It explains a lot, doesn't it? So what do we do now? Knowing that all of us are affected by this, what I've taken to calling post-medieval stress disorder, how do we honor the grandchildren? How do we release them from this cycle? Well, I think we have to carefully examine and, yes, defy our own cultural heritage. Raise your hand if the extreme consumerism around Christmas bothers you. Yeah. Now keep your hand up if you're still participating in it. Right? I think we've got to pay attention to those nagging feelings and follow them to a new way of being American, a new way of celebrating winter holidays. And that's an act of defiance. It's also an act of love for the grandchildren. I think we have to break the rules that we inherited from our dysfunctional families and cultures. We have to talk about uncomfortable subjects. We have to trust our neighbors and people that we reflexively regard as the other. We have to feel our feelings and honor them. Find out, what are they trying to tell us? We have to remember the foolish and the evil stuff in our heritage, along with the glorious triumphs. There are glorious triumphs, and their celebration would be so much more meaningful if we remembered honestly and authentically the missteps and the errors and the awfulnesses that taught us to reach for them. Remembering it all requires a kind of defiance that's rooted in love for the grandchildren. So we have these intersecting threads. Research on direct trauma and its effects on our bodies. Studies of epigenetics as a possible transmitter of trauma through generations. A commitment to building a new way for the grandchildren. And we have our UU values to guide our way. And woven together, these threads suggest that if we want to bend the arc of the moral universe... Did we just lose the mic? I haven't changed the batteries in a while. If we want to bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice, if we want to create inclusive, beloved community, we have to start with ourselves, with our bodies. Yes. We have to think globally and act locally. Think 7 generations and act now. And it doesn't get any more here and now than our own bodies and minds, right? How can we heal from this? Well, there's not much of a scientific consensus on that yet. But Resma Menakem describes techniques that his ancestors used to soothe their bodies and build resilience during the compounded traumas of enslavement and the Jim Crow era. So I encourage you to study his books with others and to incorporate the techniques that he offers into your daily routines. Holocaust descendant and trauma therapist Gabor Mate is another good source. And then Anne and I were blown away by a talk given by a Vietnamese, the Vietnamese refugee and trauma educator Linda Thai, who studied with Bessel van der Kolk, author of the maybe familiar The Body Keeps the Score. There are lots of resources and lots of movement in the field of healing from trauma, both our own trauma and ancestral trauma. My own path encourages me to weave in what I've learned from Brené Brown and from yoga and other kinds of somatic practices like deep tissue massage therapy, Sufi and folk dancing, and 12-step recovery. And taken together, they tell me that justice requires healing relational and systemic harms through healing ourselves of residual trauma. So to that end, here are some affirmations. I want to share some affirmations that I think may help. And they reflect wisdom from all of those sources I just mentioned. So none of these are going to be surprising or very new to you. And in full disclosure, I should tell you that I consulted with an AI as I researched the commonalities among those many different approaches. So not all of the turns of phrase are mine. And Susanne has a bunch of copies of the affirmations printed out. So get one after the service and you can put it on your fridge or your mirror or something. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to skim through them. But I think they're worth taking some time with when you get home. So maybe consider one a day on rotation or something like that. Justice requires healing. My healing is sacred, necessary, and revolutionary. You know, a surgeon can't heal if they're using a dirty scalpel. And we can't create justice while we're still expressing a traumatized Eurocentric culture. Einstein said something to the effect that we can't solve a problem using the same level of thinking that caused it. We have to evolve. And that's a sacred, defiant, necessary process. Healing is not a race. I honor my unique rhythms, knowing that growth takes time and tenderness. One of Tema Okun's characteristics of white culture is urgency. Our economic system insists on it, right? Time is money. We think it's normal to be frantic all the time. It's not. I am whole even as I heal. I am enough even as I grow. Even the most broken among us have inherent worth, right? That's part of who we are. The trauma response is a defensive one. Evolution gifted us with it because it bestows survival and resilience. Our personal and cultural defects served a purpose at one time that is no longer relevant, so we can thank them and release them. My worth is not defined by my productivity, perfection, or performance. Talk about Defiant. Any other workaholics in here? If my only value is in what I accomplish, then productivity becomes all that matters. But we are so much more than our products. We have to love ourselves when our culture keeps telling us that our value is measured by our work and our possessions, what our bodies look like. Talk about an act of defiance. I am allowed to feel all my emotions. There's no shame in my pain. We don't handle grief very well in our culture. We give each other timelines, saying, get over it, move on with your life. Let's grieve in community, as long as it takes. We place limits on who's allowed to express anger, and when, and how. Emotions are embodied. We don't choose them. When we put a lid on them, they often squirt out sideways as violence or depression, right? I reject shame as a tool for growth, and I choose compassion for myself and others. Love demands compassion, including for myself. You know, I'm often last in line for my own self-care. Shame is easy. But recovering addicts will tell you that when it comes to growing beyond our worst instincts, shame just makes things work. Gratitude works better. My body carries wisdom as well as wounds. I listen to it with curiosity and care. How do I feel right now? Will I honor that feeling or shut it down? I choose authenticity over approval, even when it's uncomfortable. I can speak my truth with courage and still be loved. I'm a beginner at this. The fear of conflict is strong in this one. I embrace vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness. Now, asking for help is a strength. And there's an old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Our greatest accomplishments from building the pyramids to building the beloved community require deep cooperation among vast teams of people working together. Rugged individualism deters us from even assembling those teams. I listen to understand, not to fix, judge, or defend. And this affirmation presumes that I listen at all, right? So I have to start with just those first two words. I listen, period. Old cis white guys like me, we take up a lot of cultural space. I'm doing it right now, right? I can talk less and listen more, especially with my political and cultural opponents. There's a ton of research now that says curiosity is more persuasive than evidence. When we listen with genuine curiosity about others' perspectives, it opens them to reconsider their perspectives. Once aware of an unhealthy pattern, I lean into the discomfort with grateful acceptance and curiosity before I take action. In our culture, we tend to jump from awareness straight to action without taking the time to fully understand and accept the reality as it is. A premature rush to fix a problem we don't fully understand, that's a recipe for continuing the cycle. I release any inherited pain and fear that no longer serve me, and I bless the resilience that remains. Erasmus Menakem uses the phrase somatic abolition, abolishing the effects of racialized trauma from our bodies. European Americans have this work to do too. It's precisely because love is not at the center of American cultural values that makes Unitarian Universalism such a needed voice, however we symbolize that love. I only have glimmers of what my ancestors went through, but I am aware that almost every immigrant to this continent came as a refugee from some kind of trauma. Religious persecution, famine, poverty, war, genocide, or enslavement. Native Americans are refugees from all of those traumas, but inflicted on them in their own land. So this trauma is in all of us. The most recent science we have says that our ancestors' trauma may live on in our bodies as well as our minds, our culture, our spirits. This is part of our heritage. Now, for those of you who've been holding your breath this entire time, trying to figure out what is going on here, I'll tell you sort of. One of these kids is a genetic descendant of my mom, and the other is the child of the same-sex marriage of my mom's grandchild. And no, there is no way to tell from the photo which is which. And the point is that to my mom, it makes no difference whatsoever. These are her great-grandchildren. She actually has two more now. These are her great-grandchildren, full stop. And I gotta point out, you don't know these kids' genders either. No one does. We won't know for sure until they tell us. Adorable bow ties notwithstanding. And as it turns out, there may be some small hint of a possibility that there might be grandchildren for Anne and me. But I'm not going to hold my breath. There are millions of grandchildren out there for me to love and nurture. But to do that in good conscience, I have to strive not to pass on the unresolved trauma that comes with my European American heritage. And to do that, I have to defy some aspects of that heritage with love, for love. I have work to do. We have work to do. Let's get started. May it be so. We live inside bodies that carry it all. Ancestors, history, culture. As we work to build a new way, let us carefully examine our contents and pass on only what's worth keeping. Go in peace, return in love, Make sure you get a copy of the affirmations, and I'll see you at coffee hour.